I would like to warmly welcome you to this dynamic panel about accelerating innovation. Perhaps the most important topic aligned to this year's theme, Accelerate and Innovate, actualizing the nation's need for dominant air and space forces. My name is Doug Raaberg. I'm the Air Force Association's Executive Vice President and honored to serve as your panel moderator. Joining me are 5 leaders of innovation. Together, they represent the full spectrum of innovation, from a creative mindset to delivering lethality to defeat peer and near-peer threats, particularly from China and Russia. Dr. Jeff DeGraff, the foremost innovator in our nation and joining us on this panel, passionately claims, quote, "Our mission is to democratize innovation." Today, we'll explore the innovation ecosystem that is driving innovation to tackle tough operational problems. Please welcome my guests. Lieutenant General Q. Hinote, Deputy Chief of Staff for Strategy, Integration, and Requirements, Headquarters, U.S. Air Force. Lieutenant General Duke Richardson, Military Deputy, Office of the Assistant Secretary of the Air Force for Acquisition, Technology, and Logistics. Major General Kim Crider, Chief Technology and Innovation Officer, Headquarters, U.S. Space Force. Dr. Jeff DeGraff, Professor of Management at the University of Michigan's Ross School of Business and the author of The Creative Mindset. And Brigadier General Heather Pringle, Commander of the Air Force Research Laboratory. General Hinote, kind of briefly set the stage for us. You're responsible for developing the Air Force strategy and multi-domain concepts to deliver timely and effective capability to the warfighter. How do you see innovation in the efforts to accelerate change to position the Air Force for today's great power competition? Sir.
Thanks, Doug. And I just want to say what an honor it is to be with you. I'm excited about this year's virtual Aerospace Warfare Symposium. And it's a real honor to be with this panel. I know them all, and they are both wicked smart and good people. So in many ways, I'm looking forward to learning from them. But I'll try to start us off here and set the stage. And I'll start off with something that I have found in my time since coming back from Iraq, back here in Washington, D.C. There's very few things that bring together all sides. I think we all understand that it's a tough time for public dialogue, but I've found one, and I think it's really important for the things that we're talking about today. And it is that when we were able to coalesce around a national defense strategy, and we had one that was put out in 2018, what I have found is a significant bipartisan level of support throughout the circles that I'm able to interact with about the objectives in the national defense strategy. You know, we think about strategy, and a lot of us were taught about strategy when we were coming up through school, that it's ends, ways, and means, right? And so we think of the ends as being the goals or the objectives of the strategy. And we think about the means as being the resources you apply to the strategy. A lot of times we talk about money, but it's not just money. And then the ways are that how do you combine the approaches to warfare? Sometimes we call that doctrine. And how do you combine the technologies or the equipment and manpower and the training and the tactics that you're using? And all of that comes together in ways of fighting. And so what I have seen is that there's great agreement on the ends, that we find ourselves in a period of intense competition with China specifically, and also with Russia, that our allies and partners are incredibly important for how we approach that competition, that we have to reform within the Department of Defense to get better at what we do. And I find tremendous support on both sides of the aisle for those ends. What I see is that the means are very likely going to be under pressure. So as an example, even if we were to assume fairly level budgets over the next several years or so, what we would likely see is a slow erosion of purchasing power. Why? Well, you have the situation where what people cost is actually going up faster than inflation does. There's also the problem of eroding buying power when it comes to things like supply chains. They're pretty important, and we want to make sure our supply chains are safe, and that means we pay a little bit extra for them, in some cases a lot extra, and that's okay, but it means that your purchasing power goes down. So in essence, what you've got is your means, everybody wants to keep the ends the same. Your means are under pressure and perhaps going down, and that means you have to change your ways. And so all of those things we talked about, the doctrine, the training, the tactics, and the procedures, the way that we put all of that together is the ways that have to change. Because if we don't do it, we won't achieve the ends. The ways have to change. And it's not just about technology, although technology is critical. It's certainly not about organizational changes, although that's critical too. It's all of it put together. And so what we try to do throughout the Air Force, throughout the Department of the Air Force, is to give everyone permission to think a little bit differently about the ways. And that's hard to do, right? Because militaries are not prone to adopting new ways very readily. In fact, a lot of times we're trained very deeply, and we have a deep sense of belonging and pride associated with old ways. Just honestly, right? I mean, I can tell you the airplanes that I flew and when I flew them and the people I flew them with and all of this stuff, and I don't think I'm abnormal in that. But what we really are looking at in the future is this idea that we are going to have different ways of fighting. Okay, what does that mean? I think it means that in the entire Department of Defense, the organization that has been most consistently associated with new ways of fighting, with innovation in the way you bring combat power to defend the United States, has been the Department of the Air Force. It's the thing we offer to the Joint Force. We are the ones who ask why not. We're supposed to be the ones who take big risks and who make big bets. And that is our heritage. Sometimes we live up to it. Sometimes we get into bad habits of, hanging on to the old ways. But I tell you, we will be doing our job in the Department of Defense if we are the ones who are pushing for the new ways of fighting and advocates for the new ways of fighting. And so as we think about innovation, what we're going to do is we're going to think about innovation holistically. Every part of the ways of our fighting has to be on the table. And so, yes, we're going to talk about technology. Yes, we're going to talk about new organizations. Yes, we're going to talk about new doctrine. And we're going to talk about new connectivity and networks and ways of passing information and all that. All of that has to come together. And if it does, I think there's a pretty good chance, and I feel pretty good about our airmen and guardians' ability to put new ways on the table and make the Joint Force better. So I'm excited about where we are. I'm also excited about the challenge ahead because it's going to be hard. And we should never waste a good challenge and even maybe a little bit of a good crisis because we've got to change pretty fast, as our chief has said. And so this is the time for innovators to come to the fore, and I think our department can deliver in that way.
Sure, great scene setter. Obviously, cost per effect is part of that equation of innovation, so thank you. Let me step us higher. And General Richardson, would you open the aperture just a little wider for us on how the Department of the Air Force accelerates innovation?
Yeah, I'd love to do that, Doug. I would echo General Hinote's statement about the panel. It's a pretty neat panel. I think I know everybody but one, but I don't know if I'm going to step higher. I will probably step a little bit lower. And what I'd like to do is just make a point that General Hinote, Q, as we call him here, Q is basically talking about ways, and I think he's talking about that in the most general sense. So he's, you might think he's just talking about, he's really talking about all the .mil PF stuff. What I'd like to do is really zero in on I'll kind of follow that same exact theme about the ways, but what I'm going to talk about is the material aspects of that. In other words, how we acquire the stuff. We do think we also need to innovate in how we acquire it. And one of the things that we've learned is very often the Department of the Air Force also has to lead the industry base. We're not waiting around for the industry base to tell us how to change. And if left to its own, it'll probably continue in the same path that it's been on. If I'm left to my own, I'm going to basically acquire things the same way that I've always acquired them. But we don't think that's the right way to go. That's not going to accelerate change. And so just like Q, as he runs his organization, is trying to design what the Department of the Air Force in the future will look like and what equipment they'll fight with. We are also in the acquisition executive's office trying to figure out how we will acquire things. And I'll give you a spectrum of ideas here. I'll try not to belabor this too much, but it's kind of a spectrum. And what's first on that spectrum is this idea of digital engineering. And you've heard, some of us talk about that idea of digital engineering, and it's, in its most simplest term, that's almost something we have to do. I will tell you, we don't think that's the most innovative thing, but it is definitely a prerequisite. And so, but it's that first thing along that spectrum of innovation for acquirers. And so what I'm talking about there is basically, think of it as, cloud collaboration is really the best way that I can describe it. The ability to collaborate like we've always done, but using cloud techniques, using new computing techniques, using new tools. If you think about the tools that are at our disposal now, that's really what I'm talking about. The design tools, the systems engineering tools. Systems engineering hasn't changed. It very likely won't change as long as I'm around. So, but what has changed is our ability to use new tools to make that happen, these collaborative tools. The idea of a PLM tool, a product lifecycle management tool, which kind of houses our data and kind of strings all of it together. And what's cool about those PLM tools, like, I won't say a vendor name, but there's plenty of them out there. What they allow us to do is then share that same information, share models, feed in drawings, all the tech data, anything, the requirements processing, the systems engineering tools, all that stuff. We can share it with the vendor base, not just ourselves. We also have analysis and modeling tools. We have visualization tools. So this whole collection of tools that's now available to us. That's what we mean by digital engineering. It doesn't mean using a computer. Obviously, we've had computers around for a long, long time. That's not what we're talking about. We think that using that set of tools, that concept of digital engineering is going to allow us to go much faster through the design process, through the spec verification process, frankly, everything, through the assembly process. You've heard of this idea of full-size determinate assembly. It allows us to push much more of the work into smaller vendors because the precision of the drawings is that great where we don't need to be drilling holes on some very large production line. We don't need large tooling anymore. We don't need large facility space. So there's just a whole host of things that these tools do from left to right across the life cycle. That would probably be an entire hour of discussion. But really, I will tell you, Doug, that's really just the first thing. What we would do then is we would say, well, how do we accelerate that even further? What I would offer there is this idea that the Department of the Air Force talks about of digital trinity, right? Where you take the digital engineering, which I just discussed, then you have this idea of agile software, which is another hour discussion. And then you have this idea of open mission systems, and you put those three together and you get this idea of digital trinity. Part of that, the reason that works is you'll hear us talk a lot about this government reference architecture, which is really, if you think about it, it's kind of like, Apple. If you want to write an app for an Apple phone, you have to use their software development kit. And as long as you write that app to that standard, you're going to get it on into the Apple App Store. And same thing here. If you want to produce hardware or software for the Department of the Air Force, you're going to have to follow a government reference architecture, which allows us to control the interfaces. And that opens up a whole new world for us. So that we are taking much more ownership of what's going on between the subsystems. It obviously allows us to upgrade systems quite a bit as well, right? That is sort of in the middle. That's still pretty darn good, Doug, but that's still also just in the middle. That's still, all that does is it builds me an F-22 really fast that I'm still gonna fly for 30 years. I just did it a lot faster and a lot more collaboratively. What we really think is the end state is this, what I'll call hyper accelerating innovation. And that's when we talk about this E-series concept, right? So imagine because of those digital tools, the digital trinity, being able to cycle quickly and actually building an airframe that maybe only is certified for, say, 4,000 flight hours, not 8,000 or 12,000. Imagine that for just a minute. Knowing ahead of time, making that decision up front to only have that limited life, and maybe start doing much smaller lots, and maybe running every 8 years, you're building a production lot and you're only flying it for 16 years. Doug, think about that. So instead of trying to scab on additional things to legacy fighters, why don't we just make a brand new fighter? And if you think about it, this is exactly what you do in your own personal life. You don't continue to, try to upgrade the engine and the transmission in your car or do other coding sorts of things. We don't do that. We shouldn't do that with airplanes either. And so that hyper acceleration is really the one that excites us most. What I want to just mention, though, is what we're really trying to do for General Hinote is get not just overmatch for 20 years. We want overmatch in perpetuity. We really think that hyper acceleration is how we do that E-series approach. And it doesn't just apply to fighters. We think it applies to satellites. We think it applies to weapons. There's really no end to it. What I'll say is we're also trying to be realistic about this. I gave you a spectrum of sort of 1, 2, 3. What I would say is what we're trying to do is be pragmatic in our application. We think that all of it applies, at least the first level applies in almost everything that we do, but probably the E-series would not necessarily apply to everything that we do. So we're going to try to apply that 1, 2, 3 approach pragmatically, make sure it fits the situation. But I hope that gives you a sense for, we believe as acquirers that we are also innovators in how we acquire, while General Hinote and his team are trying to innovate on what it is that we are acquiring. Thank you.
Sure, thank you. It almost sounds like you're talking about creating the conundrum in the virtual realm. That's another aspect of innovation, especially at the strategic level. Let's go even higher. General Crider, with space as a distinct warfighting domain, please provide us some initial insights into the innovation roadmap for the Space Force to achieve dominant space, definitely by defending our space assets and defeating hostile action. Ma'am?
Thank you, Doug. Oh, and thanks so much for the opportunity to be with all my good friends on this panel. I'll tell you, it has never been a more exciting time to be in the Department of the Air Force because of all the common ways in which we are thinking about new opportunities to defeat our adversaries. And with the advent of the Space Force, our newest and youngest service, we have that opportunity to take those challenges to our adversaries to a much higher level. Space has always been a critical part of the joint fight. And now with a service that's fully focused on organized training, equipping, and presenting forces to the joint warfighting commands in partnership with all of our other services, we see so many more opportunities to create dilemmas for the adversary. Along the lines of where my good friend General Hinote was going, there is a lot of commonality in the ways in which we are looking to innovate and looking to create opportunities in our warfighting operations. A lot of commonality, not only within the Department of the Air Force, but across all of the services with regards to the importance of joint all-domain operations and the criticality of leveraging joint all-domain operations to deliver competitive advantage. Again, from a Space Force perspective, being on that high frontier and having that position in space where we can see everything and we can know many things by being able to pull in information from all the other domains and then share it and exchange it with our other domain partners so that we can protect and defend our assets in space and also ensure that those assets can deliver those critical capabilities, not only with space-based responses, but with responses from other domains. Space is fundamentally a joint all-domain fight, and we rely on the support and the service from every other domain to assure space is always available, always safe, and always secure. And I think our other partners look to space to be an integral part of their ability to deliver their integrated effects. So this idea of joint all-domain operations is something that we've continued to advance. And it's exciting that now we are at a point in time where all of the services, and certainly within the Department of the Air Force, we have a critical focus on how to deliver those capabilities and how to ensure integrated all-domain advantages at the edge, leveraging cloud-based services, leveraging high bandwidth networks across multiple levels of security, leveraging data in the cloud and advanced analytics, and making that available in the hands of warfighters on the ground or in the cockpit heads-up display, or with the warfighters that are sitting in the ops centers at our space operations centers around the world. And even in our onboard space-based platforms, pushing analytics all the way to the edge so that we can leverage that information as we bring it in and be able to exchange it more fully across the enterprise. So joint all-domain operations and the work that we're doing within the Department of the Air Force by leveraging the Advanced Battle Management System with our Air Force partners is really our way of experimenting through and delivering capability that demonstrates how we will conduct those operations and how we'll create those dilemmas for our adversary. Along the lines of where General Hinote was going, of course, we're going to do that through digital engineering. ABMS and the Chief Architect's Office is building out an architecture for integrating air and space. ABMS is one key component of that. There's many other important capabilities that are being integrated and being described in a digital engineering way, described through digital models, a variety of ways that we can look at considering options or considering threats or considering ways to build out that force design for integrating air and space and cyberspace with our joint partners in ways that we can create competitive advantage. So using digital engineering to really think through future force design and future force architecture is an active effort that we in the Space Force are emphasizing greatly. It certainly guides our S&T portfolio and our partnership with AFRL, and it guides our integration into that ABMS architecture. In addition, as General Richardson pointed out, digital engineering across the enterprise to look at ways to more rapidly accelerate our ability to deliver and develop satellites and satellite capabilities and integrate with ground stations and other systems around the globe, and doing that in a digital form. So that we can advance new ideas and new concepts. We can think about ways to build out a satellite bus that can host a variety of different payloads and look at those capability and cost comparisons continuously over time. And I would argue that it's a way to certainly deal with that diminishing means that General Hinote mentioned earlier. Yes, we are all in a period of constrained resources, but if we can really advance these digital capabilities and the ways in which we're going to leverage digital technologies across our force, across our acquisition, into our force design and into the different options that we have for developing capabilities, I think we will find that we'll have more buying power in the long run as we look for more effective ways to deliver those integrated effects. So from a Space Force perspective, we are excited to be partners with our other joint partners in the Air Force and the other services, and ensuring that space is always available and space can contribute to the joint fight, and doing so in a way that leverages digital to the maximum extent.
General, I think you just expanded the envelope of innovation in all domains, joint, but to the largest domain in, through, and from space, or innovation of the future. So thank you. But I have to bring us back to Earth. So Dr. DeGraff, you've literally written the book on the creative mindset. Please share with us some thoughts on how institutions like the Air and Space Forces can now drive the innovation culture and empower those innovators that are out there.
Thank you. First of all, this has been fascinating. I would like to submit the greatest case of innovation acceleration in my lifetime, which is the COVID vaccine. Now, let me set the stage for you. We have all of these institutions that use planning, process, and penalties. And by any objective standard, up and down the board, including the one I work for, have failed miserably. But at the same time, organically, 595 creativity clusters emerged, loose federations, people who have relationships. And out of that came 116 phase 1 approvals, 54 phase 2. We have 3 that have made it through emergency phase 3. We have 8 in the box. We think we're going to have about 16 by the time March comes. We're going to have a whole series of tools, very different therapies, and something that used to take 10 years is now going to take 10 months. That's the standard. I want to make sure everybody understands that's the line in the sand. We're doing it in 1/10 of the time, and we couldn't do it in the old way. So how do we do it? Number one, a shared vision. We have a common enemy, just like you do, a new enemy, right? We had something we hadn't seen before. We weren't even sure what it was. We had a sense of destiny. This crossed boundaries. All of a sudden, it was sort of like universities with biotechs, with fintech, and we're all getting together organically, and we're shaking the box. Lots of diversity. Boy, if you look at the groups, I'm in the Innovate room right now. If you look at all the groups that come together, we come from different parts of the world. We have different ideas, and that produces constructive conflict. We don't agree. And in fact, if you think about the 3 vaccines, those are all 3 radically different therapies. We took really different tracks on this thing. I want you to think about the shots on goal. 595 approving, according from the CDC, shots on goal. But think about, and it looks like it costs a lot of money, but at 1/10 of the time, and think about what the cost is going to be to the economy if we don't solve this. Right? It's a fraction of this. So certainly faster. Now, here's the key. The way this organizes is organically, where you get maybe older guys like me who kind of have, you know, their little solar system. But the notion is it's not us that are innovating. It's young people and people with different ideas and people who think, oh, the old man's kind of he's lost a step here. I'm going to get him now, right? It's true. But those people come together and they push and they push and they push, and they exhibit a lot of what's called self-authorizing behavior. Now, here's the challenge. Here's the challenge I see for the Air Force. The challenge is the same challenge we went through with COVID. And that is, there's a difference between breakthrough and follow through. There's a big difference between breakthrough and follow through. Now, if we're going to get to space and we're going to get to scale, we're going to need something that I'm not seeing a lot of in the Air Force, and that is middleware. I'm not seeing emissaries. I'm not seeing ambidextrous people. I'm not seeing those bridges. What I'm seeing is, and I've been, you know this, General Raaberg, I've been in over half the Fortune 500. What I'm seeing is amazing front-end technology and amazing back-end implementation. But in order to connect the dots, you're going to need these middle places. You know, this is going back to my COVID. In September, somebody should have said, this Pfizer thing's coming right down the pike here. We better get Walgreens involved because they've got, you know, a cold chain, and we better get the Guard involved because they can put needles in arms and all the things that needed to happen. The middleware didn't happen, and that's why we're languishing. So in order to sync this up, I think the Air Force has an amazing forward position. I think you probably could get to where we are with the COVID vaccine. But in order to do that, you're going to have to do a couple things. One, you're going to have to get out of your own way, right? We have seen the enemy, and he is us. It's not the foreign adversaries. It's our own bureaucracy. And 2, we're going to have to build some middleware, right? And finally, you know, what I really love about what the Chief of Staff is doing, that shared vision. What is the one thing we're doing? What is the fight that we have to win here? Because if you have a shared vision, you don't need all the planning, the process, and the penalties. You've got everybody going in the same direction. So I think that's the greatest case in modern history, 1/10 the time. Now I want you to imagine this. Imagine if you're at the FDA and you're trying to do drug discovery the same way you did it for a cancer therapy next year. Good luck to you. right? So the key is the new is setting the pace.
Wow. Doctor, that is an incredible set scene for your partner, General Pringle. So General Pringle, some would say AFRL is the propellant for innovation for the space and air forces. So over to you. Tell us how your command sets the stage for accelerating innovation for Guardians and Airmen.
Well, thank you so much. And at AFRL, we love being the propellant or to fuel innovation. And frankly, we love being the cornerstone of our Air Force and Space Force science, technology, and innovation ecosystem. So we do this through 3 ways: a steady pipeline of innovation, a good set of problems to work on, as well as the most amazing, talented people to work on it. So let me just take a tiny moment to elaborate on those 3 points: the pipeline, the problems, and the people. As far as a pipeline of steady ideas, it's all about going from curation of a small concept, developing it into prototypes, and then exactly as Dr. DeGraff so eloquently laid out, it's getting it to that next step. What is that middleware? And part of our new pipeline as a part of the Science and Technology 2030 strategy is building the pipeline for Vanguards. These are all in Department of Air Force technologies. They are game changing. They're not unidimensional. They require a wide breadth of technologies and expertise to come together to deliver these capabilities. It requires warfighters, technologists, as well as acquirers all in to make these happen. And exactly as Dr. DeGraff said, get that middleware so that we can produce these at scale. As far as interesting problems, in this unit, we like to say we're one AFRL for 2 services. We take that seriously, that we are supporting both the Air Force and the Space Force in word and deed. And oh my goodness, what an interesting set of challenging problems that both these services have. And it's important that we take all of AFRL and all the talent to apply to both these problem sets, because as my boss likes to say, a technology doesn't know its application until we tell it. So things like microelectronics or quantum or artificial intelligence, they could apply equally to an air domain or a space domain. And we want them to be able to transfer between the two, take the best of breed from one domain and apply it to the other. And then thirdly, but not at all the least, are the amazing, talented people at AFRL. I like to say we have 6,000 unicorns, and they are everything from astrophysicists to doctors to amazing functional contracting ninjas, and they make the magic happen. So bringing them all together to work on these amazing problems and challenges that our 2 services have provided is how we fuel innovation.
Wow, General Pringle, what I get the sensing is that at AFRL, you're creating this ecosystem for innovation vortex that's going to bring in the small, medium, the incubators, the startups, those that are just wishing to be a part of this innovation ecosystem for the space and air forces. So thank you. For all of us, we have about 10 plus minutes, so I'm going to do a change in gear and go for rapid questions, starting with you, General Hinote. So, sir, how does fail early, often, and perhaps off camera fit into strategy development?
Yeah, it's one of the things I get asked about the most is this idea of, is it okay to fail? Generally, no, right? I mean, it's not like we go out there and we go, well, yeah, let's go fail a bunch. I'll tell you what I say is, if you learn from your failure, it's probably a good failure. But there has to be a degree of discipline associated with that, right? We don't just go out and make a bet on anything. So Heather brought up the Vanguard programs. So these are big bets that the Air Force is putting down its reputation, its best efforts into going and solving. Each one of them, however, we've looked at, we've studied, we have some reason to believe that the bet could pay off. And if it were to pay off, it would pay off big. And so it's a disciplined bet. It's not just going out free for all and let's go fail just because it feels good. It means we actually are going to go out, and if we fail, we learn from it, we grow from it, and we move down the line. And to some degree, the failures could be part of that middleware because it pushes us forward in learning. A great example of that is the Skyboard program, which is a Vanguard program. And we are learning incredible amounts in that program. We don't really know exactly how every unmanned vehicle is going to work in the future battle space, but we're learning really fast with it. And we've got some incredible industry partners that are walking that learning journey with us. So I would say that when we think about failing, if we are disciplined in the bets we take on, and we fail and we learn from it, then failing is totally okay. And so it's all about that disciplined innovation. It's certainly one of the things General Brown's been impressing upon us.
General Richardson, how on the next step is, what is the next step to brand innovation across the Department of the Air Force?
Yeah, Doug, that's a good question. I'll tell you, and I resonate with what Dr. DeGraff said about a follow through. And I think that's really what I would like to just discuss for just a second here. So, and I'm going to try to stick to the acquirer's mindset for just a minute here. I think what we've got to do is, those ideas, that spectrum of three things that I mentioned to you, that has to become the DAF way, almost to the point of, it's the DAF way or the highway. But the problem is, in order to get the folks in the middle, or even the leadership, by the way, who really don't want to learn new things, there's a lot of .mil PF things that we need to do. And so we're working really closely with Air Force Materiel Command General Bunch. We're working with Space and Missile Systems Center General Thompson, working with the Space RCO, the DAF RCO, to make sure that we're not just throwing out these buzzwords and expecting people to figure it out. So, what tools should they be using? Should we standardize the tools? What are the processes? What training courses should we develop? So we're working with the Air Force Institute of Technology to come up with training courses that allow that train these techniques. I will tell you, Doug, what's challenging about it is this idea of having this disciplined approach of, tools, training, procedures, even whether you should dictate which model-based systems engineering tools should be used. That's a tough decision, because as soon as you start mandating it starts to sound like you're not being innovative, right? If you start constraining. So those are the things that we're wrestling with right now. We know the path we want to be on. We're working through the nuts and bolts right now to make sure that we can do the follow through part of it that Dr. DeGraff mentioned. We know that that's critical. I mentioned the digital engineering, the digital trinity, and then I mentioned this E-series, right? So we are trying to get the training, the processes, and the people all in place for those things to happen. I really didn't touch much today because we're running out of time on other things that we're doing in terms of making sure that we tap into the commercial R&D base. We're doing that pretty heavily. General Pringle's helping us immensely on that. There's a bunch of other initiatives. I think at this point, we've got to make sure that we follow through and we hit the steady drumbeat so that every 6 months when a new leader comes in, we don't come up with a new latest thing that we're going to go try. And I think really, we do think we're on the right track. There's got to be a little bit of stick-to-itiveness so that it becomes just part of the fabric. It becomes the DAF way. Thank you.
Thank you. General Crider, in your perspective, what's the biggest challenge to accelerate space or capabilities that really guarantee the freedom of action in space?
Well, a lot of what we're doing in the space business is rethinking how we build not only our operational capabilities from a technology standpoint, but from a process and procedure and ConOps standpoint. So this idea of bringing it all together and experimenting with new capabilities and new concepts and new ways of working is really part of the exciting challenge that we have in front of us. And I'll tell you that our Space Force Guardians are definitely up for that challenge. They're chomping at the bit to really draw out whole new concepts that leverage everything I talked about earlier. The joint all domain ways of doing things, but also thinking very hard about their space doctrine and about what it means to conduct space warfighting operations in partnership with other warfighting domains, and working through that and thinking through that and exercising that. There's not enough time in a day to work through all of those challenges and all of those opportunities, and to think about space as a horizontal integrated set of capabilities that need to be delivered and need to be protected and need to be assured all around the globe. But it's certainly something that we're getting after. And we're leveraging digital ways to do that. We're leveraging digital in our training and in our operations. We've established combat development teams in each of our deltas that really are the pointy edge of the spear of thinking about these new integrated concepts and new integrated technologies that they would want to bring to the fore. They partner very closely with our partners at AFRL in bringing forward new technology prototypes. And then we also think through the whole process of transition. Transition is a big focus of mine. And if we can't get those innovations, the majority of them, to transition into operations, then we won't be able to take advantage of them, and we won't be able to apply them to address our warfighting challenges. Sure, some number of them are destined never to transition, and that's part of the whole process of learning that General Hinote talked about. We want to allow for that. But I'm very focused on making sure that we have a transition metric, that we know what our transition metric is, and that we hit it, that we know that these are the technologies, these are the capabilities, and these are the concepts that go along with them that are going to transition into operations. And we have a thorough approach on how we think that's going to happen. And we work through that way to the left of that capability and that new concept being developed, and with all of the partners who bring something to assure the successful transition of those capabilities, so that it's a continuous process, not only of learning, but leaning forward into transition and leaning forward into effective utility of the capabilities that we need.
Quickly, Dr. DeGraff, what do the best companies do to accelerate innovation, since we're accelerating our panel here?
Yeah, I think one of my favorite examples was this past weekend and watching that Michigan quarterback Tom Brady take a terrible Bucks team from the previous years and win. If you want to know what the road ahead looks like, go talk to somebody who's been there. See one, do one, teach one. You cannot underestimate the very important power of know who knows, enlist them, build your capability, and your strategy is almost assured to be successful.
And General Pringle, you always know how to really top the note. Innovation isn't a one-size-fits-all approach. What's AFRL doing to innovate, to capture those various ways people can innovate?
We have a number of innovation cells that have been created spontaneously to address different problem sets. We have some that help our junior force learn the process of innovation and get from start to finish. We have an innovation cell dedicated solely to artificial intelligence and a whole host of others. But AFWorks is our newest innovation cell, and they're dedicated to reaching out and connecting with industry, especially non-traditional industry that the military hasn't been connected with in the past. So we're doing a lot, but we're continuing to evaluate where are we missing and where do we need to go next.
So you get to go to the bonus round here, General Pringle. I'd like each of our panelists to give just one quick blast thought for our audience to really put in their minds how you see innovation today and into tomorrow. So General Pringle, your last thought, please.
Well, thanks so much to you and to AFA for allowing us this opportunity to be here. It's been a great, great day. And if I had one thing to say about innovation, it's that we should be the ones creating the tech surprises and delivering those to our adversaries. And that is exactly what AFRL is all about.
Perfect. Dr. DeGraff, fire away.
Stop trying to put the new into the old. Follow the new.
General Crider, I can't top that.
Innovation is a mindset. It's about being bold. It's about accepting diverse ideas and perspectives and bringing those to bear. And it's about willingness to take risks and willingness to continuously learn. It starts in the minds of our airmen and our guardians, and it ends up as capabilities that will defeat any adversary that we face.
Perfect. General Richardson.
Yeah, I have two things. I don't know if that's allowed. The first one is that innovation requires follow through. I mean, this can't be just a 1-year exercise. I just think that's so critical. And then the other one is just making sure that we hammer home on all the .mil PF parts of that, so that we don't expect our people just to figure it out, listen to the buzzwords, and somehow just know what to do. It's got to be a comprehensive daily approach to it. And I do think that we are the department that can lead the way in many ways. Like General Hinote is trying to create multiple dilemmas for the enemy. I think one central way of doing that is making sure that we create multiple dilemmas through material management. And really that gets into making new stuff, not making old stuff a little bit better. Over.
Sure, thank you. That's awesome. So on an innovative end note, General Hinote.
Okay, well, I can't top what my fellow panelists just said. So I'll have to phone a friend and go to my chief of staff, General Brown. You know, in his Accelerate, Change, or Lose paper, there's a line in there that I found really interesting, and it was, he discusses the idea of innovative and courageous problem solvers. And I think it is important to remember that innovation always took courage. And in so many ways, we remember our heritage by looking back at the leaders who had the courage to innovate. And I believe we're talking to a bunch of airmen and guardians and our partners in industry and in science and technology and academia who are courageous. And I think that's the community of practice that we bring to the Joint Force. They need us to have that courage to innovate. So I think that's something that I take from my chief, and I think he's absolutely right.
Well, team, thank you definitely for this inspiring conversation and for joining us here at the Air Force Association's virtual Aerospace Warfare Symposium. Now, for our audience, thank you for tuning in to watch this panel on accelerating innovation. Now, please be sure to check out AFA's daily report for the latest coverage on the virtual Aerospace Warfare Symposium. Thank you.